Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. I'm coming to you live from my home office, and while we wish that we are all gathered together physically at Charis, we're thrilled to be bringing you this really special panel in honor of Person About Town, Edward Austin Hall's debut novel, Dread Isle. It's always really exciting when your friends write books and you get to celebrate them. But, you know, Ed is somebody who has been a friend to pretty much every artist, writer, geek, nerd, enthusiast in the city of Atlanta and beyond. He's been a cheerleader for so many people's art babies that it feels really special to me that we get to be a cheerleader for your book tonight, Ed. I think of you as truly one of the most generous members of the Atlanta arts community. And so I'm really excited that we get to put you in the hot seat and celebrate your work when you have been there for so many people. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel, and then we'll get on to the business of celebrating Ed. So first, I'm going to welcome Bryant O'Hara. Bryant was born in Long Beach, California, the son of a Marine Corps technician from Helfland, Alabama, and a data entry clerk from Decatur, Georgia, both of whom instilled a love of music, art, technology, and the pursuit of knowledge. He received dual degrees in mechanical engineering and humanities from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Yeah, I was like, my partner from Massachusetts will kill me if I say this word wrong. In 1993. And his poetry has been published in Pandemic, Atlanta 2020, Starline Magazine, and iDrum periodically, as well as recognized in the Science Fiction Poetry Association's Poetry Contest Long-Form Division. Bryant is a member of the Tau Kappa Epsilon Fraternity and the Science Fiction Poetry Association, and is an ordained minister in the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. He lives in Stone Mountain, Georgia with his wife, Alice, 2 out of 7 children, and 1 out of 5 grandchildren. You can listen to more of Bryant's poems and audio pieces on our website, so check that out. And his debut poetry collection, The Ghetto Birds, will be published by Frayed Edge Press in May 2021. So welcome, Bryant. Also with us tonight is Lesley Wheeler. Lesley Wheeler's debut novel is Unbecoming. A Star Review from Publishers Weekly calls it an excellent feminist fantasy. She's also the author of 5 poetry collections, most recently The State She's In from Tinderbox Editions. The Receptionist and Other Tales was a finalist for what was then the James Tiptree Jr. Award. Taking Poetry Personally, Wheeler's essay collection about 21st century poetry is forthcoming in 2021. Her poems and essays appear in Massachusetts Review, Strange Horizons, Poetry, Lady Churchill's Rosebud Wristlet, Kenyon Review, and other magazines. Wheeler is poetry editor of Shenandoah and lives in Virginia. Welcome, Lesley.
Thank you.
And the person of the hour, Edward Austin Hall, is an Alabama escapee and lifelong Southerner. He co-edited the 2013 anthology, which we loved at Charis, Mothership, Tales from Afrofuturism and Beyond, which the magazine of fantasy and science fiction suggested might be one of the most important science fiction anthologies of the decade. Dread Isle is his first novel, and it's the novel we're here to celebrate tonight. So we invite everybody who's watching at home, if you have questions, you can put them in the Ask a Question box. You can click this teal button at any time to buy the book directly from Charis, and you can shout out where you're watching from in the chat if you want to. But I'm going to go ahead and pop out of the way and let this generative discussion begin. Welcome.
All right, everybody. So I guess I'll be starting off with the first question. So many thoughts going through my head right now. I've read the novel actually a couple of times now. And I guess the first question I had, which is kind of related, probably the first question somebody asked, is how, we'll ask the obvious question. How did you come to write Dread Isle? I mean, there's a lot of interesting takes on genre and structure. And what were you thinking?
Many people bear the blame.
First and foremost, Tim Bird. Tim years ago published a novel called Doc Wild and the Frogs of Doom that Putnam put out as a, I want to say as a middle grade thing. And this was at the height of Harry Potter. He wrote it at the height of Harry Potter fever. And he said to me in passing one day, you know, you should write your own like YA thing. I thought, yeah, I should do that. And so I started writing a book, Tim Speed on Chimera Island. Well, quickly, Tim Speed dropped out of the title, and it became much more of a what I think of as a Doc Savage title, right? Like Tim's book again was very much inspired by the Doc Savage stories of the 1930s, which my father read in magazine form, turned me onto in their paperback incarnation mid 20th century. And so I started writing this book seriously as Chimera Island. Began reading chapters of it, which you heard over the course of months, you know, when you were there at Writers Exchange, the old Idrum literary salon.
Oh, yeah.
And I read the entire novel, start to finish, 36 chapters, you know, over the course of, I think it was a little more than 3 years. But yeah, so that's how it came into being. Once it was done, the fine folks at Sterling Editing, Nicola Griffith, Kelly Eskridge, did their magic on it. Specifically, Kelly edited the first draft, and her central edit was, you have to figure out a way to get into the characters' heads. And I thought to myself, no, I don't.
Right? You know, that's
right.
You don't. So, you really don't.
And that was literally my reaction. It was, no, I do not have to go into the characters' heads. I want it to be. I want to put the reader in the situation that the characters themselves are in. They see only what's on the faces of the characters around them. So there's a lot of kind of, if you will, interpersonal uncertainty principle going on. Right? There's a lot of facial choreography. I pay attention to a lot of minor expressions and gestures, because I want you to be in that situation of trying to like, what does that mean? And a lot of times I am making reference to expressions that are linked in a behaviorist sense to specific mindsets.
Right.
So, and then I think the first person I was, the first person who really like kicked me upside the head was George R.R. Martin, who, you know, I saw a video of him and he said, yeah, you know, you don't, or maybe it was an interview with Martin, wherein he said, yeah, you know, if you don't get into the characters' heads, it's not a novel. And I was like, so
you basically just say bet me.
Okay, fine. Kelly was right. So, and it gradually happened. So you do, in the main portions of the novel, you do actually go into the head of one of the, let's say, characters. But it's not a human character.
Right.
And then later I thought, the second person to wave their hands over was another Writers Exchange regular, Ian Campbell, also known as Julian Cage. Just a supremely talented storyteller. Has these great police procedural stories that are available on Amazon. Too Busy to Hate is one of his books. So he read the book. He gave me substantial notes. He was like, no, right? You've got to establish this other location that the novel is working toward much sooner. And so at that point, I was like the novel itself at sea. And I thought, what am I going to do? And then I realized, oh, wait, I can go, this is almost exactly a thing in almost exactly the words in which Kelly suggested it. I don't know if you're going to go into the characters' heads in between chapters. And I was like, oh, yeah, you know, that was a great idea 7 years ago. So it took me 10 years to figure out how to respond to her edit. right? And you know the line. I believe Gene Wolfe said, nobody ever figures out how to write novels. You only figure out how to write the novel you're writing. And so, I mean, I'll go ahead because this question's on my mind. David asked in the questions, right, like who are your influences? The anxiety of influence for me is over Gene Wolfe, who is, for those who don't know, essentially the Herman Melville of science fiction. And I consider the Book of the New Sun, his quartet of novels, absolutely magisterial. His, right, like his Melville, so to speak, was Jack Vance. And I only went seriously into the work of Jack Vance last year. I actually taught my favorite Jack Vance shorter work that I've read, The Moon Moth, which is coincidentally, maybe not, because I got to pick the story. It's set on a planet where everyone is expected to wear a mask. So timing.
Yep.
And then Thomas Harris, right? I'm obsessed with the Lecter novels. And so even when whatever genre I'm writing, I'm always writing crime fiction on a certain level. And and I like Harris, I'm not comparing myself to Thomas Harris, but like Harris, I was a journalist. Specifically, I was a researcher for more than a dozen years for Newsweek magazine. My job was reading newspapers. So, you know, that was finishing school. And so there's a heavy journalism influence, right? A lot of this happened and this happened and it happened this way and it happened here, right? People have talked to me about kind of the verism of the main portions of the novel. But Bryant, you and I have talked about how there's something very different happening between those chapters. And that is in the interludes, where my approach, and you'll both appreciate this, as you are both poets, essentially what I tried to do in between the chapters was to distill the most important thought that somebody would be having more or less either contemporaneous to the events or immediately after the events or right around the time of the events that had been depicted in the previous chapter.
They kind of orbit the events, essentially.
They essentially orbit the events. But the trick of the novel is I tell you where the person whose head you are in is at that time. I do not tell you whose head you're in. I never tell you whose head you're in. And the only way you can figure it out is to read the whole book and then go back and look at it and go, okay, this person knows this, therefore this has to be this person.
Right.
The only way to figure out whose head you're in at any given moment. And that's the trick of the book.
Can I ask a follow-up question to some of that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just so people haven't seen this book yet, and it is a really wonderful book, really fast-paced and fun, and you should totally buy it, and you should order it from Charis Books. But I wanted to show people that this is sort of what the interludes look like, that you have chapters that look more familiar, but then you have these very brief moments where you're sort of shot into a different mind in a different place. And I wondered, I mean, I think that's really cool and I think it works well, but I also think it's very weird as a narrative structure, right? And I wondered, I flashed back to a book I haven't read in a long time. There's a Hemingway collection of Nick Adams stories that has these little inter-chapters in between them, which are basically mini narratives. And I wondered if there was any model like that. To what extent did this feel like a whole cloth invention on your part? And to what extent did you pluck from other books or strategies?
Honestly, I had no model for it. Again, it was strictly a reaction to Kelly Eskridge's note. I really had to like crawl my way to that. And essentially why I started out introducing it as saying you two as poets would appreciate it. I tried to distill each of those interludes into something like a poem, except they're not verse, they're not structured as verse, but just in terms of like getting down to what are the most important thoughts that would be going through that character's head at that moment.
A condensate, basically.
Exactly. Yes. I like really one of the one of the first things that I looked at when I was getting ready to write, I started reading from my dictionary of chemistry, because one of the characters here, as I think it was you and I who discussed this, Bryant, is a generalist. He's educated in all sorts of things. He's a polymath, as opposed to being a specialist in any particular area. Right. And then only later did I see an article about why it is that generalists tend to be the most successful inventors. This is a boy inventor novel, but it's also a demolition job on the boy inventor novel.
Yeah, that when I first read through it, after I finished the whole thing, I was like, wow, I felt like I just read a whole Johnny Quest novel.
And there's a huge Johnny Quest. So this thing distills my 3 great adventure pleasures as a kid. Johnny Quest. Yeah. And I would put Johnny Quest music, the Hoyt Curtin, Ted, can't remember his last name, Ted Nichols music, just on repeat when I would be writing.
Well, that'll do it.
Tom Swift Jr.
Right.
So these are the mid-century Tom Swift novels. The Tom Swift novels, these Edisonades, they're called historically. Right, Thomas Edison as a boy. That's what an Edisonade is.
Right.
These were popular before there was World War, and some of the really early popular ones were the Tom Swift books, as by Victor Appleton, which was that was a pseudonym, just like Doc Savage was written under a pseudonym. There's no Kenneth Robeson. There's no Victor Appleton. There's no Victor Appleton II, who was credited with writing the Tom Swift Jr. books that I read in grade school.
Right.
I went back and tried to read, I think, Tom Swift in the Caves of Ice, which is one of the original series books. And when I got to a use of the N-word in just casual conversation, I was like, nope. Put it on the shelf, still have the book, we'll never open it again, right? It's like, what's Gandalf's line about the language of Mordor? I will not utter it here. So, yeah. Not a tome I will brave in the future. But yeah, so Tom Swift Jr. and Doc Savage. The title I settled on, Dread Isle, could easily have been a Doc Savage novel title.
Right.
They have really, Poison Island, Hex, World's Fair, Goblin, and honestly, there's a real poetry to the Doc Savage titles. The Running Skeletons,
It does sort of run off the tongue, doesn't it?
Yeah, and so that's a lot of what informs this book. But I think Nicola was the one who said, she just very casually said, when you're writing a novel, just put everything in it that you can think of, and
just carve away the rest.
that's how you counterfeit the world, right?
Yeah,
I think the only major things that are not food is very much downplayed in the book, because they spend so much time in a dire situation. I think the only thing that the only things them to consume are energy bars and bottled water. I don't think any other food is mentioned.
It's not like they got time to like microwave something.
There's I mean, there's too much dread going around. So
Well, one of the things I did, I think when I first started talking to you about it was, and I think you alluded to it before, that there's a lot of directionality in the novel. Like you're made very aware of, not only people's expressions, but where they are in space, and it's like where their bodies are. And I think it kind of helps with the action, because again, you're not relying on some of the traditional narrative tricks that you would have in a novel. It's kind of like, it's almost like you have like a body cam and you're basically along for the ride.
Very shrewdly observed.
Mm-hmm.
When I was doing the right, you see only what the characters see.
Right.
I imagined it as you can see in, as they say, exiguous detail. Imagine very tiny cameras, indeed, orbiting about the characters. So, and there are a few times where the omniscient narrator ventures beyond that. You'll hear a snippet because I'm gonna read in a minute. I think that I think what you said about directionality, and I've been thinking about that since we first discussed it some weeks ago. I think you'll get a better sense of that because I'm going to read from the very beginning of the book, and there's I've tried to pack as much information as I could in here while making almost none of that information obvious.
Right.
You have to the book demands that you use your head to figure out what it is I'm trying to tell you. There are few background details that are insignificant.
Right.
There are conclusions you can reach. There's information that even at the end of the book is withheld, compelling the reader to go back and say, what exactly did he mean here?
Right. Yeah.
I want the reader to meet me halfway. Lesley, yes.
There was just a question that came up that's related to this. It's from Anna Rodriguez. In the interludes, I can't always tell whose head is speaking. Is that intentional because it adds to the mindscape for me?
It is absolutely by design. There's stuff about these characters that if you know in advance whose head you're in, and I've thought about this, it's like, I'm not sure this could ever be made into a movie. Right?
They could do it. You just need another.
I can't imagine what it would look like as a movie or any kind of screen adaptation. Indeed, it is, and it is very much by design that I tell you where the character is. So if they're at the main setting, if they're at the setting of the book at the outset, which again I'll read from it after I answer this question. Then your list of characters is probably pretty low, right? There's some question at the outset of the book of exactly how many people are on this fake oil rig. I'm not giving anything away to say that. We learned that again. That's one of the very few sort of intrusions by the omniscient narrator is to say essentially what the history of this place is without really telling you, okay, it's not what it looks like, then what is it? Well, if you know your science, you could figure out what it is, where it is, and what it's for. But you have to write. This is a book about scientists. In many ways, the other passion of my youth, a way you could summarize this book, imagine a James Bond movie, all done from the point of view of the mad scientists.
It would be better.
Yeah. It would be better.
Yeah.
It might even be educational. But be careful. You might learn something. You might learn how to destroy the world. Oh, wait, we figured that out already.
Yeah, but in a creative way, with a little bit of style.
I think it's called global climate change.
Oh, yeah, that too.
Yeah. Oh, that. So, if it's all right, I'm going to read from chapter 1. Actually, I'll read literally from the beginning of the book, including the dedication. And there is no relation between this Tim, who's a real Tim, and the Tim of the novel, other than they share a name. And that's not who the Tim in the novel is named for. He's named, right? It's a play on Tom Swift. Tim Speed, Tom Swift. But the dedication of the book is for Tim, my pal, without whom. And I quote J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan, I'm not young enough to know everything. And the universe is not only queerer than we suppose, but queerer than we can suppose. That was said by J.B.S. Haldane. And I give you a pocket reference because there's a repeated reference to Heim fields, H-E-I-M. Those are named for a real scientist, the physicist Burkhard Heim, who lived 1925 to 2001. and devoted his adult life to formulating a unified field theory and attempt to explain and connect the foundations of the universe, including efforts to answer the riddle of gravitation. Chapter 1, Horizontal to Vertical. At the top of the ladder, the boy, a teenager by mere days, closed his right hand around the last rung. He shut his eyes, shivered, and remained still for a moment, as he did every time he reached that summit without incident. A strengthening breeze rippled his clothes, but carried no chill at this place of no latitude. He opened his eyes and turned to look along the observation deck railing. Another boy stood there, facing east. Though shorter than the boy on the ladder, the one at the railing had the advantage of elevation. Neither boy spoke. Where they were, high above the ocean, wind snapping a makeshift flag overhead provided the only sound. The boy on the ladder looked at the hand-me-down boat-neck shirt and knee-length shorts, once his own, hanging askew on the body of the somewhat smaller boy. Then he looked up at the noisy blue rectangle the two of them had made from a coverall. The flag bore 3 large faded green letters in hand-sewn italic, SII. The boys' names, smaller but in the same green, occupied opposite sides of the flag near its lower edge. Tim, Pal. With deliberate care, Pal, the taller boy, stepped clear of the ladder. Beneath the boy's feet was a 200-foot tower of metal lattice work, and at its base spread a floating oceanic platform. In every aspect, the overall structure, by design, resembled an oil rig, but it had never been used or intended for any such purpose. Miles of water and sky surrounded them and the platform. No speck of land interrupted their blue view. Tim, the shorter boy, lifted one hand to shield his eyes in the mid-year light. A wide segmented glass.
Oh,
You just froze it.
did we lose Ed? Oh no. Well, I guess while until Ed comes back. So Lesley, did you have any thoughts regarding Dread Isle or?
Tons, and I kind of want to ask him when he's here, but
Right.
since your first book is coming out, do you want to tell us all when that's happening?
Yeah. Well, my first book is actually it's a collection of poems entitled The Ghetto Birds. And they are basically science fiction poems for the most part. And the title is named after a slang term I learned while I was driving with my brother, basically somewhere in, I think, downtown Atlanta. And this song came on from NWA called Ghetto Bird. And I asked him, okay, well, what the hell's a ghetto bird? And he said, it's a police helicopter.
Right.
So basically, not long after that, I kind of ran with that idea of taking this this man-made object that's doesn't have a very positive connotation in many parts of the Black community, and deciding to turn it on its head and make a group of these entities, and they're referred to in different poems. It's not a totally linear narrative, but they're some of the primary characters that you see over and over again in it. And the sort of the purpose of the book is to kind of show people advancing, through hardship. Okay.
Where did I drop out? What was I? What? Where was I before
I should have memorized the line, but I don't have
no
it.
worries. Before I was so rudely interrupted. I'll pick up with Pal did not shift his gaze Tim's way. When I asked yesterday, you didn't say anything. When Uncle Chew asked, you just shrugged. After a lengthy silence, Tim said, "It'll be the second anniversary in 3 days." Pal's eyes widened and his mouth gaped for a moment as he drew a short, sharp breath. His entire face clenched, and he exhaled through his nose. When he opened his eyes again to look sidelong at Tim, Pal scowled. "Thank you. Not all of us have perfect calendars in our heads. Some of us like it that way. Sorry. I wish nothing changes out here." Tim turned to look at Pal for a moment before gazing at the horizon again. "Have wariness with wishes, as the truism goes. Last time things changed was the reason we had to come live out here." Pal opened his mouth to say something further, but closed it a moment later, as patter from the flag underlined their mutual silence. Pal tapped his little finger against Tim's. Tim looked for an instant at their two adjacent hands on the rail. Pal seemed to maintain his grip, but, in fact, used his fingers to signal Tim. At the angle each boy held his banded arm, neither one's moving hand was visible to the two-way wrist devices they wore. And at this point, they go into an exchange of kind of coded hand signs and signals that's it's not the best thing to read out loud, so I'll leave it there. But
it's a really fun aspect of the novel, though, is that code that they speak to each other in, and the sweetness and the intimacy of those two boys having that secret mode of communication is something that's instantly appealing about those characters to me.
Thank you. I was not privy to the whole movement that, again, one of my editors, Nicola, is now a big part of, and I will use the term that Nicola applies to it, and that is crit-lit, and it's disabled. It's essentially a disabled representation in literature. And while I was absolutely not trying to do that, in many ways, this book lands squarely in that territory, almost as an accident. But I can't talk about this too much because it really gets at the core of the book. But yeah, there is that aspect to the book, and I was thinking specifically about Helen Keller and how Helen Keller communicated. So yeah, that informed it certainly. So, and yes, it's of course perforce intimate. It's literal hand-to-hand communication, as opposed to sometimes they use sign language, but sometimes they are literally communicating. They're signing or signaling in the palms of one another's hands.
It seems to me that although it's definitely a book about blurrings and doublings of identity, that the converse is also true, that it's a book about people reading each other and learning how to communicate over very tricky kinds of divides, that we're not getting lines of internal monologue from the characters, but we're learning an awful lot about them in that first scene, that they have griefs, that they have fears, that they are frustrated with each other, that they also rely deeply on each other. It seemed to me that you're getting at those character issues very strongly through what they do and what they say, right? And yeah.
Trying.
It is a relationship that does unfold. I mean, the relationship between the boys and Chu and all the other characters is something that you never really get to the very crux of anything until not even at the end. Not even at the end.
Oh, well, that's maybe not a good thing, but hey.
No, I mean, well,
I did write what I said. Right, that's true.
But the way the book is structured, it's kind of like you're getting pieces of a puzzle.
And some pieces, I will admit, have purposely been omitted to compel you to go back, right? It is a book. This is a weird artifact of like alpha, beta, gamma readings.
Mm-hmm.
And usually I would have like one person reading it at a time. But the first person like that who was not a paid editor, I think this had to be after I made the changes that Ian Campbell essentially more or less demanded,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that led to the introduction of the interludes.
Right.
After that, the comics writer, illustrator Molly Kiley read it, and I think she read it and then went back and reread it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And that I noticed that men who tried to read it early on often gave up. Women who read it would go back to the beginning and read it again. What that was about, but I was like, okay, I'll take it. So, and yes, in many ways, the book is about a very specific sort of language that is not. It's about a specific, not like French or English.
Mm-hmm.
It's about a specific mode of communication, but more than that, I dare not say.
Right.
But I have something specific in mind, and it is deployed here for a better reason than anywhere else I can imagine it being deployed. So that's all I'll say. But it's about something that I think, I say this, having no children of my own that I'm aware of, hey, there could be a knock at the door. So, in which case I would say, come on in. But having no children of my own, yeah, I think it's something that's probably universal to having offspring. That's speculative, but I am a speculative writer of speculative fiction. So, sure. I can imagine what it's like. But I prefer to rent children in the sense of being an uncle. You can give them back at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. Same thing goes for grandparenting. So
there you go.
So I guess you said earlier on that this is a book that you expect people essentially to use their head for something besides a hat rack.
I would never phrase it that way.
I know, but but that being said, do you, as much as as an author, you want as many people as possible to read this book. Who is your ideal reader of this book?
Maybe readers of. I think I've got this term right, because I honestly, all my historical reading and critical reading tends to be of science fiction. Mm-hmm. But I believe in mystery writing, the closed mystery is the one where neither the detective or the police person or what have you knows who the killer is, and neither does the reader. And it's essentially, you both get the same clues.
Right.
Agatha Christie style.
Mm-hmm.
So probably people who read that sort of thing would they might be entertained by this.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, I'm always writing crime fiction, whether it's got monsters in it or not.
Right.
And some of the monsters here they also can be found walking the earth right now. Right. They're not neither speculative nor science fictional. They're every day. They're everywhere. Mm-hmm. It's I think of it as it's a weird sort of a thriller. It has been, I will say with some great pride, it's been on a couple of different bestseller lists. It's a subgenre. It's on a subgenre thriller list on Amazon, as well as Black and African American subgenre list. And I'm not specifying those because, again, I'm trying not to scare off readers.
Right.
There are mysteries at heart here. Some of them are never resolved. Some of them you can figure out through close reading on your own.
Mm-hmm.
That's one reason I don't like talking in great detail about the plot, about what happens, about who these people are. To some extent, these people are trying to figure out who these people are.
Right.
Right? That's one of the mysteries here is I think if I had to characterize these folks, they are by necessity extraordinarily secretive. And that can be, depending on what you do for a living, that can be a necessary thing, but it can also be a toxic thing.
Right.
It's also a condition of adolescence, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No, go on.
I was just going to say adolescents, they're deeply mysterious to themselves and they have a lot of secrets to keep. So yeah. I think of that as it's connected to a lot of the characters, that mystery and that secrecy, but it's at the core of the two boys too.
Sure. And nope, I'm not going to say that. I have to write like I would because the StoryCorps interview I did about the book today will not be one of my public StoryCorps interviews. I said everything. It's like, no, I'm going to tell you everything. But here Gene Wolfe is my model. I think the great science fiction encyclopedist John Clute had Gene Wolfe talk to a class maybe that he was teaching. Maybe it wasn't Clute, but whoever it was. Somebody out of the gate asks, so who are Severian's parents? And Gene Wolfe just kind of blinked and said, "Oh, you won't get me that easily, right?" Come on, I think Clute devoted an entire essay to sussing out who Severian's parents are in the Book of the New Sun. It's an essay-length piece of literary detective work, right? And it's not that I'm modeling myself after Gene Wolfe. Kind of the opposite. Book of the New Sun. Never have I given my dictionary such a workout, except with Jack Vance, who's like one more level above Gene Wolfe. Here's why. Book of the New Sun is set a million years hence.
Right.
But he uses, I think, one made-up term in the entire book. What he does is, instead of giving things made-up names, he uses archaic words that have, you could find them only in not even the Oxford English Dictionary, its predecessor, the Oxford Universal Dictionary. I'm not at home right now, so I don't have my copy at hand, but it's a handy book to have. It's delirious reading. It really is. You're right. And he has a note at the front that says, this book is translated from the language in which it was originally written. It's just a hilarious author joke, right? It traveled backward in time, and he translated into contemporary English. And for things that don't exist yet, he substituted archaisms. Okay, fine, Gene Wolfe, great, hilarious. Jack Vance, in his Dying Earth books, which the first of the Dying Earth books, The Dying Earth, has a cameo in the first volume of the Book of the New Sun. It's called the Book of Gold, because that's how Gene Wolfe thought of it. And after I read it, that's how I thought of it. And with Vance, you don't know when he's making up words. Now, I specialize in making up words. I had 2 units of Latin and 4 of German. This is what English is made of. I ran the intern program at White Wolf Game Studio, and I would always tell the interns, do not make up words. Do not make up fantasticated words. English is far too rich for that. And then I'd turn right around and make up words. But nobody could tell that I was making up words because the Latinate roots were so good. Because the Germanic, right? So, and with Jack Vance, he adds Greek to the mix. So I don't know what the hell I'm looking at half the time. I just know that it seems perfectly suitable. I know what he's talking about. I'm laughing my ass off half the time. It's dirty as hell. And it's just, oh my God, his writing is amazing. I just can't praise Jack Vance enough. That stuff is incredible. So, and to circle back to David's question, then the other person, right here, I read Samuel Delaney's Nova as a teenager. And I think it was after I read it that I came across the A.J. Budry's review in which he said or wrote, as of this book, Samuel Delaney is the greatest writer in the universe. And Chip Budry's is gone. Chip is still around. I think that's still true. And I think it's criminal that, one, far and away the majority of American readers have no idea who Samuel Delaney is. And even the ones who do, they can't spell his last name right. One E, folks, not E-Y. One E, D-E-L-A-N-Y, not E-Y.
Spoken like the grammarian that you are.
Hey, I copy edit for a living. We have an entry on Samuel Delaney in the Art Papers style guide. I had an essay come in that mentioned him. I can't say from whom because I don't remember, but it's like, nope. The little delete and close up. Kill that extra E before the Y. No such letter. Not this family.
That's funny.
Okay, you go ahead, Brian.
Go ahead.
Since Delaney just came up and you were talking about all the writers that you admire, and one of the things I found myself thinking about as I was preparing for this conversation tonight is how important Afrofuturism has been to you and how important you have been to that field. And you just mentioned, it makes total sense to me that you're on the thriller sublist because this is a thrilling, fast-paced kind of book. And I'm also thinking about, you mentioned being on a bestseller list among African-American SF writers. And I wonder how you think about those traditions in relation to this particular book.
I am waiting for somebody to light into me about this book and its treatment of race.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen. I guarantee it's gonna happen.
It's not going to be me.
No. I'm not talking about. Honestly, I'm not talking about sensible people. Because here it is, and this is just right. Like, this is my 2 cents worth. I've been black my whole life. I found out when I was a toddler that I was black from a woman with a lighter complexion than me, who was not a white woman, who was in fact my mother. So now imagine this. Here I am at an age where I am not yet old enough to be able to distinguish between dreams and memories. And I walk into the kitchen and there's my mother washing dishes, kitchen sink, and there's a calendar hanging on the stanchion dividing the window casements. And I look at it, and there's a picture of a little white boy in a straw hat with a bamboo fishing pole fishing off a jetty. And I point at it and I say, I remember when I was that little boy. And my mother whips around and says, you were never that little boy. That little boy is white and you were black. And that's how I discovered race. Now, I've written about that episode several times. And it was only after I wrote about it the second time that it occurred to me, for some people, this could have been, in fact, I had a grade school friend who I think was kind of destroyed by this. That it's a really sad story. I don't want to get too deeply into it, but there was some, let us say, dissembling about race in his family. And when he learned the truth, I think it destroyed him. So for me, look, I have been confused for every major racial group on the planet at this stage. Right? People are, are you from Egypt? I used to have some T-shirt with like some Arabic on it and some hieroglyphic like scrawl, and somebody said, "Are you Egyptian?" I was like, nope. There was a woman I was dating when I worked for Oxford Bookstore in Atlanta who told me a coworker said, "Oh, they were chit-chatting. This is when I moved from the retail Oxford store at Peachtree Battle up the hill to the used store where I began dating this coworker." And she said, "Yeah, I was talking with somebody about the understaffed situation." They said, "Oh yeah, that South American guy is moving up the hill." And so they, she's like, "South American?" And finally she realizes they're talking about me. and she just busts out laughing and says, "Eddie's not from South America. He's just black." And this person said, "Oh no, he's from Uruguay." Now, but wait, it gets better. I didn't put together till years later, like where that may have come from. Never mind that it's from. I have to presume. I'm guessing that the person who said this was not black, because I think black people have enough experience of, as Red Fox put it, people at every stop along the chocolate rainbow, to understand that black people come in a variety of flavors of chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand till years later that a lot of former Nazis fled to Uruguay, and so it's an especially white-looking country in South America.
Right.
And like a lot of places in, former colonial continent, there's a lot of colorism that goes on.
Mm-hmm.
That and all through the Caribbean. Now, I have ancestry from the Caribbean. We don't know from what island, but we know that they were Spanish-speaking at one time. These are my mother's people, the Velascos. Used to be spelled with a V. Sounds like B, they changed it to a B. So what I'm saying here is my mother worked at the Pentagon during World War II. She did key punch entry. Essentially, she was a computer technician.
Yeah. Yep.
Top secret at that time. And the computers were room size. And I have to believe that people had no idea what my mother was. And in fact, I know there were cases where people didn't know, because remember, Washington, D.C. is in the South. It was a Jim Crow town during the war. But Mama went wherever she wanted. Remember how I said she looked? She looked like a white woman. Did not identify that way. Had 2 black parents. I met them. If she tried to go in a place where a doorman had the idea to stop her, she cursed him out in French. Now, in addition to being a Jim Crow town, D.C. was an embassy town. That put the burden on the Jim Crowist to decide, right, do I want to cause an international incident with somebody who might be the daughter of the Egyptian ambassador? The answer was no. So my experience of race is like a game of espionage. And that, I think, tells you as much about this novel as I want to say. Right?
Right.
You can come at me if you want to, but essentially you're going to be telling me, why didn't you treat race the way I would treat race? Because I didn't live your life. I lived my life. This is how I experienced race.
I think that's a very important thing to note, that not everybody's experience, especially not everybody throughout the diaspora's experience has the same experience of race. I mean, it's usually, some dimension of shitty, but it's also multidimensional, and that colors the stories that that we tell, or we can tell. I mean, it's funny that we're just starting Black History Month, and it's and at the same time we're talking about Afrofuturism, and it in some ways it almost seems like the two are diametrically opposed, because one is focusing explicitly on history, and the other is trying to say, okay, imagine going past that.
I feel the need at this point to talk further about my mother. This is a revelation that came to me only in the course of writing a tweet about my mother and about her experience. And I realized something. My mother, I have to be open about this, because I'm sure that some people are sitting out there thinking, well, your mother was passing. Well, you can apply that term, but I like to think of it as there's a 4-letter word that I would use with the ing, like, with bigots, right? That she was doing. I also, in writing about her, I have used the term piercing. She was piercing Jim Crow. And again, putting the burden on the person who would exclude her because they suspected she might be someone whom they could legally, but not ethically, bar. So fine. Essentially, my mother was she was a, I'm not sure the word to use here. She was a race piercing spy in some respects. But this came at a cost because my mother was also, things could come out of that woman's mouth that were as bigoted as I have ever heard any human being say. And I realized why that probably was so. She probably was often in spaces where she heard bigoted white people talk that way about her and people like her. And it's like Palmolive and capitalism. She was soaking in it. And that shit is catching. And I think the biggest favor she ever did for me was to be so outspokenly bigoted. And what it left me with was an incredible sense of intolerance. So there's a lot of things I have patience with. Bigotry is not one of them. So it's something that I, essentially try to eradicate. I recognize my own biases. I will not talk about them here because that would just be right. What would be the purpose of that?
We're not trying to make you look bad here.
Yeah, I mean, get me drunk and, I might cop to some stuff. But but I struggle with my biases at the same time that I recognize they're not coming out of nowhere. Let me put it that way. But I also recognize them as biases. They are biases. They leak out. They tend, in my head, to taint people to whom they ought not apply. So, I try not to, I have as a copy editor, I have a particular objection to slurs that characterize people based on skin color. I could talk to you about how I was the copy editor at the Atlanta City paper, the daily paper of record, where somebody had used the R word. Rhymes with head, rhymes with heck. Right? In print. And I was like, what? And it was a very casual use. And I turned to my white male boss and I said, this really kind of offends me. And he said, you want to call the writer over? I said, sure, let's do that. So the writer, white male, came over and I said, do you think of yourself by this term? And he said, God, no. And I said, so why is it okay for you to characterize this family this way? And he just stared at me. I'm sure he thought, he must have looked at, it must have been like I was green with antennae, right? Like, who's this Martian?
Right.
So, but I find that whole class of terms, again, probably as a result of growing up with my mother, I find them deeply objectionable. They are not suitable for polite company. You use them around children, not at your peril. You're already lost, to my mind. You have to be rehabilitated. But then you're polluting children by uttering them in their presence.
Right.
So, no, don't go there.
Yeah. That's one of those words that crops up sometimes in conversations among undergraduates, where you have to have the conversation about names that people within the inside of the group can use that are not allowable by others.
That's right.
And one of the things I've been wanting to ask you about this book is you have that epigraph that you read to us about the queerness of the universe.
Yeah.
And of course, that's a word that's been through cycles as far as what its meanings have been in different decades. And it's one of those words that there have been, I can remember it being used as a slur among my in a workplace that I was in the 80s I guess it was the 80s. And now it's a really important term that names a lot of qualities of the universe that are difficult to articulate because the universe is a profoundly mysterious place, right? And I just wanted to know if you would talk about that and why that that quote sang to you so much and why you think it belongs with this book.
Well, there are several reasons. I mean, I apologize beforehand because I know there are people for whom it's still a slur, but given my own history, there's not another word that I identify with better than queer, because of my romantic history, which is, it could scarcely be called exclusive to anyone other than adult human beings. But it's a broader thing than that, in that I'm also weird. I'm a very strange person from a family of strange people. My mother, in addition to being this, in many ways, kind of insane bigot, was also just a lunatic, but in a very sweet, sort of damaged sort of way. Charles Addams and Tom Lehrer, those are the two creators that my parents kind of raised me on. I can still sing most of the Tom Lehrer songbook, right? The Chemical Element song. I've memorized that a couple of years ago. And Tom Lehrer, who's still alive, just recently put all his work effectively, though not actually, in the public domain. So I've rewritten the very last line of the song so that it's no longer out of date, because many chemical elements that are not in the song, the original ending is these are the only ones of which the news has come to Harvard, and there may be many others, but they haven't been discovered. Well, I rewrote that as these once were all the ones of which the news has come to Harvard, but many more than I can name or list have since been discovered. So, yeah. So that's the Lehrer influence. And then for those who don't know who Charles Addams was, if you know the Addams family, he created those characters as single panel cartoons for the New Yorker magazine. And there's a real weird resonance and recognition between the Halls and the Addamses. There's a Christmas photo of the family that I think of always that, right? Like, I think my mother has like a foam spider perched on her head like a hat, and her eyes rolled up. No, wait, no, she's just grinning, kind of like kooky evil. And then I think my nephew's eyes are rolled up in his head. Somebody's standing off to the side looking at the rest of us like, I don't know who these right escapees are. I think I'm lying. It's a gaggle of asylum taker overers.
I want to see that picture. So
I gotta find it. I still have it, but yeah. And so, right, again,
Uh-oh.
Yeah, might have frozen again.
Well, I think we're I think there is definitely that element of strangeness in Dread Isle that definitely puts, that puts that work in the category with a lot of novelists and poets and even musicians, really, that kind of, I mean, like, again, if you take that that idea of queerness, both in its, I guess, original sense and all the other senses it's been applied to, both good, bad, and indifferent, and you get, I think you get this very multidimensional word, and it's not absolutely beautiful, it's not absolutely ugly, it's a very human term, like most human things. It's a little bit messy. So we were just talking about the nature of the word queer,
Sure.
both in its original sense and in its however many senses it's in now. They're not separate. They are
right.
They're composite, and it's why we still use the word in many different ways, both good, bad, and indifferent. But that's kind of the human condition to a large degree.
Yeah. And that gets at what I was saying before I dropped out. I think I was running up to the observation, not mine. Lesley, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
We can't see
Yeah, we
you.
can hear you.
We can't see you now. It's just your avatar that's visible, but it's okay. And that is, everybody's a little bit queer.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I interpret that is there is no normal sexuality. And I apologize if you're hearing me say this again, but yeah. And it looks like Lesley dropped out, so hopefully she'll be back in a second. So,
for some reason, a line from The Doors came to mind.
What one?
Well, people are strange when you're a stranger.
Oh yeah, yep. So
there's a comment in the chat. Queer, the quote, gets the reader ready to doubt all of their possible assumptions about how the characters relate to one another. It's very smart.
Yep, that's this book.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, because again, it's another thing that I always strive to do in any piece of writing is never to do what. It's not Kelly's term, but I love the way she says it when she says it. As you know, Bob, dialogue. Right?
I think you worked very hard to get around that.
And this is why, like now we live kind of in the golden age of science fiction cinema, right? Parallel worlds, dark energy, dark matter, cloning, all this stuff. People just not only accept but expect this stuff. Mm-hmm. Almost the world has finally caught up with all this science, and so this stuff you can just toss it in sometimes willy-nilly and just pile it up in things. Think of something like Rick and Morty. Where it's just rife with science fictional ideas, so many that the number of science fiction ideas by itself is a joke. And I've now completely forgotten where I was going with that. But
things are so strange. We're kind of like we're just expecting more strange.
Right.
Even if we don't quite understand it, and people
and after the year we all just had, right? Like somebody the interviewer, the StoryCorps interviewer asked me, and I may have said something to this effect that, I wanted to get my novel out before I turned 60. Mm-hmm. But I said, actually, the real pressure was I wanted it to have a copyright 2020 date on it. If that makes sense, right? Because in my lifetime, the three most science fictional dates were 1984, 2001, and C-Lab 2020.
Oh, Jesus.
And it does kind of start out on a C-Lab. So,
Yeah.
you know, so yeah, it's like, even the copyright is a science joke in this. And let me tell you, science jokes are really rare. Oh, we were talking about science fiction cinema, right? As you know, Bob dialogue, right? So this is the kind of exposition where, as you know, Bob, we'll be using the framulator to soar into the stratosphere and then into the deep dark of space. No one talks this way. Nobody talks this way. You know,
Press
and
the
this
button,
is
we're going to orbit.
what?
Yeah, press the button, we're going to orbit.
Right. And so, you know, and here, and the challenge here, I was writing about characters, every last one of whom is smarter than I am.
Yeah.
So I can't. That's one reason I wanted to stay out of their heads, right?
Right.
I'm not Einstein.
Yep.
But I can kind of give you the sense that they might be, by just giving, right? If I give you kind of their emotional response to something, I don't have to worry about what they think mathematically about anything.
Yeah.
It's beyond my understanding.
It also helps to ground them in the fact that they're still human.
And there's that. I think a thing that I was trying to do, to be perfectly honest, I understand now that there's a lot of kids in the aftermath of Harry Potter who wanted to learn Latin.
Really?
And I wanted to do something like that for the sciences. I wanted to make people interested in science. When I worked for the Atlanta, the daily paper in Atlanta, every year for my year-end review, they would say, what would you like to see different in the paper? And I always had the same answer, 3 words: more science news.
Right.
Because, you know, weirdly, I'm a last adopter. Like, I shy from new technologies a lot of the time. Right. I think certainly every smartphone I own was given to me. I've never bought one in my life.
Right.
And the first cell phone I got, I did not buy. It was given to me. Actually, I'm not sure I've ever bought a cell phone in my life.
You lucky duck.
Hand-me-downs, you know.
They work.
New technologies are for pornographers and criminals, and that's that's right. Yeah. You know, thieves, pornographers and thieves. New technology, especially if it's in any sort of media, I guarantee you the pornographers are there, and the hackers and the digital pickpockets and all those folks, they flock to that stuff, right? Because
new toy.
It's supposed to be exploited.
Yeah.
Right. It's pockets to pick. You know, it's digital monies to be pilfered. Sure. So I'm going to let all that stuff shake out, and then, you know, a few years down the line, I'll take a hand-me-down.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you on the science part, because there was an article I just read this morning, and it just came up on my phone. It was from Scientific American. It was about some guy. He was looking at, I can't remember where he was, but he was looking at this particular plant, and it had this little yellow flower at the top. Except it turns out that the one of the other plants next to it wasn't a flower. It was a fungus on top of the plant. It was basically mimicking this flower. You know, remember that people think the weird thing about fungi is that they're not plants. They're not animals. They're like something else altogether. There's a different kingdom.
They're almost
from a different kingdom. Yeah, they're closer to us.
Yep.
And so this thing, it looked from a distance. Well, if you were an insect or something like that, or somebody not paying attention, it looked like a flower. And to an insect pollinating that flower, it couldn't tell the difference either. So it would basically try to, go up to the fungus, spread its spores, just like it would spread the pollen of a flower. So that's just, that's just nature being strange. So,
or as Lesley points out, queer. I mean, and it's
now that's queer. That is queer in every sense of the word.
Yeah.
There's stuff to be unpacked in that Haldane quote, because there are implications to that Haldane quote that I think about a lot lately. Because the implication of what Haldane is saying needs to be wrestled with. Probably in a sequel.
Yeah.
So, and that's all I'm going to say on that front. But it's interesting to note. There's also a lot of Zen in this book. It's informed a lot by Zen. Not to the extent of something like The Man in the High Castle, but although I guess that's the I Ching. But yeah, there's a heavy Zen influence in the book. And Haldane spent his last years living in India.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to have influenced his thinking a great deal about the nature of the universe.
Right.
So, are you still with us, Lesley?
Yeah, I am. I'm furiously taking notes on all the smart things you're saying.
What? So,
is my video gone again?
Yeah, we're just seeing your icon.
Yeah, that's why I asked. And it seemed like you had a question to ask earlier, but because I couldn't see you, I had no visual confirmation. It could have just been a noise that sounded was you.
I wanted to remind everybody that they could throw questions into the chat or the ask a question feature, since we only have 10 or 15 minutes left.
Right. Listen, there's a third question there, by the way. So.
Okay, good. Should I read it?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. Lee here. I want to know when you are going to write about Grau again.
What makes you think I haven't been writing about Grau all along? And for people who are wondering what that means, my fictional alter ego is a half black, half German, honestly, sociopath I created as a character when I was playing participating in a role-playing game called Werewolf from my then future employer, White Wolf Game Studio. And Tim Bird actually was running that game. And we sat outside of the precursor to, what's the cafe to the left as you're approaching the Midtown Cinema? Opry Diem? Is that Opry Diem?
Cafe Diem?
Is it Cafe Diem or Opry Diem?
Wait a minute, no, wait a minute. Midtown, you mean the plaza?
Mm-hmm. Not the plaza. The one that's across from the soon-to-be former great. It is Opry Diem. So,
yeah. Okay.
Those same people did in fact have a place called Cafe Diem on, I believe, North Highland, or maybe just
right.
Highland.
That's the one I remember.
Yeah, and so we sat outside of that one day, filling in, etching out our characters, and I created this character, Grau, and I remember Tim asking me, well, does he have a first name? And I said, Mr. And a few nights later, I had this dream where I saw a disembodied hand sign Hughes, Hughes, Warren Grau. And from that moment on, Huey Grau, as he is usually known, has been my fictional alter ego. So, again, I will push back on Lee and say, you presume nothing, right? It's the first rule of copy editing. Presume nothing. Right? This is next question. I'm going to say more than I want to.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I guess the only question I had, which you probably already answered, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyway, since we got 10 minutes. Obviously, this is your debut novel. It is not your first published work. You've also published poems. You've edited this anthology, Mothership. You're a copy editor. Basically, you've been involved in many, many different aspects of publishing, from the creation to the editing to many different parts of it. How do all those parts come together in relation to this novel?
Well, I wasn't working on this book nonstop for 10 years, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of stuff. One of the last things that changed in this book was I watched a lot of stuff, a lot of analyses of cinema on YouTube. Right. And one was a physicist looks at, assesses 10 action film scenes. And in one of them, this man is looking at Suicide Squad. At Jared Leto's Joker. At one point dives off a high perch into a vat of acid.
Mm-hmm.
And the question was, is he doing this right? And this was a happy accident, because I think I clicked on this. I came to that video by pure accident, but it completely pertains to something that happens early in Dread Isle, which is how you fall from a great height into liquid.
Mm-hmm.
And I had it completely wrong. And for the edification of everyone listening, in case you choose not to read the book, please read the book. Right? You spread your limbs out. You flatten yourself, and you make yourself into a big X to create drag. Not that kind of drag. And that's how you slow your fall. And then presumably you don't want to actually strike the water in that pose. So you have to then kind of like reshape, I think, into a diver's position, or I think if you belly flopped into water from a great height, you'd regret it. But most of the way down, you want to be as spread out as possible to mimic a parachute.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a great revelation. I tried to get all the real science in this book as close to real as I could manage. Again, because I want to encourage people to embrace science, study science. I want kids to be curious about science, right? There's, science and science fiction are both, it's a mistake, I think, to think of science fiction merely as a genre of literature. Science fiction is a way of thinking about the world, just as science is a way of thinking about the world.
Right.
Right. It's a way of, science is not a collection of knowledge. It's a way of examining the world around us.
It's a process.
It's a process, and it's subject to change. Enormous changes at the last minute, as Grace Paley would say. Science fiction, right, is a way of interrogating the world that isn't here yet.
Right.
So, I know there are a lot of
interrogating the world as it is now, and just saying, well,
really,
all things being equal, what if you change this?
William Gibson would say all science fiction is about the present, not about the future.
Right.
And has said it. And I did have, when I was reading this book aloud at Writers Exchange, I had any number of people ask me, when is this book set? And my standard answer was always next week.
Right.
So I truly do not believe even today that there's any technology in this book that could not be happening somewhere in the world today, as the line goes.
Right.
Right. But it would also be happening as it's depicted in the book, and that is to say in secret. Because, that's how most super weapons are developed.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of the future, are you going to write another novel?
I already started a sequel to this one, in fact.
Oh, yay!
Yeah, thank you.
Sweet.
I'm excited about the prospect. I hope it doesn't take 10 years to write. I'm pretty sure it won't, just because, right? Once I learned how to write this one, I think I know how to approach the next one. But I also know that I think if this is a series, and it probably won't be more than 3 books if it's a series. Because, hey, no one is promised tomorrow. I think it will be characterized by like asymptotically escalating weirdness. So, yeah, I think it's going to get significantly stranger as it goes along. I'm just, I'm spitballing here, but that's that feels right anyway.
Aim for the asymptote then.
Huh?
Aim for the asymptote then.
Yeah. I mean, how that may manifest, I'm still not sure yet, but that's the way I'm leaning. So, where are we on time? We're pretty close to time, I think.
Yeah,
and so, are there any last questions? Looks like they may have been cleaned out.
Is there anything you want to say, or any question your interviewers have not yet been smart enough to ask you?
I bow to the intelligence of my interviewers, and I'm very grateful to have had not just either of you, but the 2 of you here together. So, and I hope that we get to do that again, jointly and severally, as they say.
Yeah.
So, no, I honestly, I feel like I've talked too much about this thing. I'm just grateful that anybody wants to read it. I'm especially grateful if anybody does read it and they enjoy it. Because I wrote it for myself. I wrote it because it's the book I would have wanted to read when I was, I don't know, a weird teenager. And yeah.
Well, I'm glad you wrote a book that, as I said it before, it is meant to. You got to think about this book. It's like it can be very easy if you're just going to be a passive reader to miss a lot and to potentially get kind of confused or even frustrated. But if you look at it really with the intent of looking at it actively, like trying to figure out, okay, what's happening here, as the process of doing that, that's where you kind of realize, oh, okay, here's what's going on here. And that's when you start really kind of looking forward to it. And depending on how quick on the draw you are in terms of literature, you'll either start doing that near the beginning or after you've read it and realize, what the? And then you go back. So whether you catch it early or catch it late. It's
all by design.
Yeah.
I've said that just reading this book may leave you with feelings of expanded thoughts and the sense of having been deceived, all by design. So,
yep.
Yeah.
I think of it as like listening to like really advanced jazz or something like that.
Thank you. I invoke Charles Mingus here purposefully. So if I'm ever involved in any kind of movie and there's ever a chase scene in it, it's gonna have Mingus music behind it. If Sue Mingus and the Mingus estate will okay that, right? Because nobody ever wrote better chase music than Charles Mingus. So
you're gonna have Johnny Quest in the beginning, Charles Mingus throughout.
I think there's a lot of Mingus influence on the Johnny Quest music on that.
I think you're right.
I think so. Lesley, was there anything else that you wanted to ask or say? Or
I actually have a long list, but I should say that I see the button at the bottom to buy Dread Isle from Charis Books and More. I want to point out
that again. You garbled just a bit.
Oh, that you should press the button at the bottom and buy the book from Charis Books. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And can you see me?
We can't see you, but we will see your icon. But we did hear you loud and clear.
All right. Good. Good.
Press the button. Buy the book.
Yeah. Press the button. Buy the book. If we had more time, I would ask you what listening to Philip Glass did to you while you were writing that book. I love reading acknowledgments, and I wondered what crazy weirdness that had on.
Philip Glass always makes the inside of my head feel like the most perfect machine.
Mm.
The analogy I came up with years ago was Philip Glass's body of work is a clockwork cathedral.